And okay, good. So we are recording. All right.
Okay.
So I went through the outline, the breakdown, and it is an excellent project. I really think that this is at a right time to be revisiting Isu and the
Hmm.
Letterists, because with with AI technology, there is now a resurgence in poetry and poetic language, right? And not just language, poetic language. And some of it's being done using AI, right? To try
Yep.
to either trick the AI software into creating something that it wouldn't normally do, but really there's not a huge difference between what the letterists were doing to what AI is allegedly able to create. The difference is it's done by human beings. And the context, right, in which this is occurring is completely different. Um,
Hmm.
when I think about the letterists, I think about the era that they came out of, right, which is following the Second World War. And if we read through Debord's Society, the Spectacle, in chapter 9, he talks about negation and culture. And what he wants to do with détournement, for example, is to create something that has to be approached as a brand new entity. You can't come to it with preconceived ideas. And so when
Hmm.
we think of the letterists writing and creating following the Second World War, what I believe they were trying to do, much like the surrealists and the Dadaists were doing following World War I, is to push back all of these theories and technologies and predetermined conditions uh, in in this case the form of communication, so that we needed to start brand new from the ground up. And what better way to do it than to literally atomize language, right? To atomize words. And so when that context is considered, it makes the work that they're doing not only more understandable, but more empathetic, right? We understand the response that it really was trying to, I guess, to generate, right? Because hopefully you and I will never see a world war, even let alone a civil war. But I can't even imagine what it must have been like to have in your backyard the kind of carnage that was World War II, because
Mm.
you end up doing one or two things. You either reject the system that created it completely, which is what the letterists did, right, and the surrealists, or you probably fall back into some sort of religious state. I mean, my dad lived in Holland during the war, and although was too young to fight, his faith was tested and was confirmed. I mean, he looked at it as I got through this alive because I believed in God. So what I'm saying is there's no middle ground, right? You either
Hmm.
have your faith confirmed 100%, no doubts, or the opposite. You literally throw away every system that got you here in the first place. So the context in which letterism begins and is a response to, I think, is absolutely crucial to understand what they were trying to do. Because to approach it again with these preconceived notions of what language and communication are supposed to be, then you look at it and say, well, what are these guys doing? Like this is laughable. It isn't. It isn't. It isn't when you think about what they're trying to achieve, right? A new language born out of, the cinders and the bloodbath that was immediately preceding them, the Second World War. So, in the introduction, I think that's something that is really, really important to highlight is the context in which this occurs. Now,
Hmm.
to compare it to what's happening in this day and age, xenopoems, for example, or xenopoetics is something which is brand new. And I'm not sure what it's responding to specifically. Like the Second World War, a very clear thing. It's a clear entity that affected many, many people. What we're looking at now is something that might be more specific in terms of the possibility of intelligence or artificial intelligence being able to now dictate to us, if we're not careful, how to think. And
Mm.
so to have artists use this machinery to kind of turn it inside out or to try to challenge it to do something that it is not normally supposed to do. Because if we follow, I think Noam Chomsky said it recently that we
Hmm.
should maybe stop calling these things artificial intelligence. Let's call it for what it really is, plagiarism machines. In other words,
Yes.
everything's there preconceived. And that's, I think, maybe the link I'm trying to establish. This preconceived way of thinking needs to be jettisoned, right? And we need to start again. And I think what we're seeing now is artists engaging and challenging this this world that's just on the horizon, but let's face it, a rapidly moving horizon towards us of artificial intelligence. So to have poets and artists engaging with this new machine to see what it can do, or also more importantly, what it can be made to do, right? Because when you engage with it on a creative level, rather than simply like, hey, what does this mean? It's going to spit out what it already knows. But what we're seeing certain artists are doing is to try to get this thing to do different things that it was not wired up to do, right? To produce some new language. Now,
Hmm.
that's not to say that Xena poems are made exclusively using AI. There's still a lot of humanity that's part of it. Um, when you're thinking through this, I know that you wanted to talk about the Kabbalistic roots. You also wanted to talk about the mathematical, the post-human. There's a lot of material um, in in your sort of recontextualization, we'll say, of the letterists. How are you going to set this up so that the reader today has an understanding of that trajectory, right? That trajectory from data, surrealism, letterism to these new forms of poetry. Is that kind of part of what you wanted to do to sort of recontextualize his work?
Yeah, it's a good question, and first of all, I completely agree with your introductory highlights. Well, Edward, in my mind, I have the following frame. First of all, I think that we have uh, to approach again letterism through the Isou
Hmm.
as a kind of avant-garde, a last avant-garde. And I say the last because I think that a situationist is a post-avant-garde for me.
Okay, yeah.
Is outside of the how can I say the classical connotations of around the avant-garde, just because of the relationship of situationism with the politics, and of course with this hard at the art and the art
Hmm.
critique for the overcoming of the art through the everyday life. So, from this point of view, I think that it's important to go back to letterism because they succeed a fantastic synthesis for me. The first one is that they succeed to evolve the most important features of futurism. The second is that they took things from the surrealism that were beyond this, how can I say, classical romanticism of Breton,
Hmm.
or this generally Gothic romanticism of the French surrealism, and turned the whole interest to something absolutely abstract. So this interest of letterism to the letter, to the atom, because the letter is the atom, is
Yep.
the absolute minimum. And it was something like, how can I say, um, a European consideration of something in Japanese, from the Japanese, and from this abstract philosophy that coming from the Zen, and at the same time something cosmological about the atom, for sure, under the influences of the quantic evolutions of the Western science after 1920. So from this point of view, letterism has something that is, for me, extraordinary. Um, how can I say? Synthesize the avant-gardes of the modernism, and at the same time turn everything to a different transition.
Hmm.
They from from this point of view, even the Kabbalistic, or if we can use the word mysticism of letter, is absolutely postmodern and at the same time, for sure, signed something that connected today with the whole narrative around the posthumanism or the transhumanism or all this debate for the next stage of humanity. So, if we want to approach from this point of view, yes, it's a kind of reconceptualization or contextualization of Letterism, because if we want today to speak for them, in order to make them modern again, we have to say to people that are interested around new philosophies or posthumanism or anything about art and the modernist avant-garde, that Letterism, guys, we want your attention, but Letterism is not like all the other. Letterism is something different. And this is for me the research challenge, because it's a kind of avant-garde in the middle of the 20th century, and it's like coming from the 21st century. But of course, with the whole limitations and all the whole restrictions that this team and this current experienced. And this is the main idea. The problem, because I underlined the problem of the sources, because, for example, not only in Greek, but also, if I'm not wrong, in English, we have a limited availability of sources around the Letterism. And I think that if you have, and I can imagine that you got a good relationship with French language, and otherwise it's an important problem to be objective in order to analyze the original, the most authentic sources around the whole spectrum of the letteristic production, not only through the magazines of the movement, but also from the books, these unique novels that Isou produced, and the other members of the letterist movement, and to have a spherical consideration about the production of the movement. And of course, the last and most difficult thing is how to connect them with our age, to say something about this kind of how can I say, generalization of letterist contribution because of artificial intelligence, and because all these potentials of autonomous production from everybody to be not only an artist, but at the same time to permit any kind of experimentation with the intelligence machines. But I don't want to, and you were right on your observation through the emails. I don't want to say that the letterism is something similar with what's going on today with the whole posthumanism thing. For example, I am engaged in few groups around posthumanism or foreign object, Reza Negarestani circles. I love to watch to contribute to some of them, or even we have this discussion with Andrew Venaus with the super futuristic and the biocosmic approaches, but I have many concerns about the posthuman trend today in philosophy. I think that on many occasions they contribute interesting things and very avant-garde, but at the same time they are so dependent on the technological development of the infrastructures of information society that I have the feeling that they do not have this radicality of letterism or the other avant-gardes of 20th century. I have the feeling that today I cannot find a group that has this kind of radicality, this deeper essential philosophical work around the transition of humanity today. In any case, of course, it's something dynamic. I love to to work it together because you have fantastic ideas and of course elaborated work on this line of avant-gardes and at the same time Isou is also I think a personality that needed to replaced because of the need to boost his contribution outside of the shadow of the board because
Yep.
the whole thing is that they were very different. I have this belief, very different personalities, and at the same time, for me, as I mentioned to you the last time, the role of Izu is more foundational on what's happened after the
Mhm.
letterism, and of course, why not? We can speak also about a deeper analysis that we need a deeper analysis for the impact of letterism on the Debord production. But I think that we have to find many interesting things. So this is my frame at the moment. Without having certain or dogmatic, um, squares, but mostly just send you the draft in order, to have a first dynamic, picture how we
Mhm.
want to place the pieces of the puzzle, and
Yep.
after that, why not to make a plan, which of course could be more concrete.
Right. And my experience when I drop a proposal, we'll say, you start working on it and you're constantly discovering new things.
Yeah,
And if you let the text write itself, it'll tell you when I need some background here. I need this.
yeah,
So that part is really, really important. I also like the fact that you're willing to look at letterism as being more than just an aesthetic revolution,
yeah.
because perhaps that's kind of what's the result of De Ball's very long shadow, right, casting
Mm.
backwards to Izu and his work, because absolutely, I think we're both in agreement that without Izu, there would have been no De Ball in the way that we know him, because even by way of criticism, De Ball still began the
Mm.
Letterist International, and at that
Yeah.
time there were aesthetic discussions, but even that early, there were still political issues that,
Hmm.
not to say that the letterists themselves were unaware of, quite the opposite, because Soulèvement de la Jeunesse, right, Uprising of the Youth, is a book by Issou that is directly influential on Debord, and that's what I try to prove in the second book, is how important it is, even by way of criticism, even by way of negation. Debord manages to create something new that, as you said earlier, synthesizes some of these different strands, right? Moves into a new direction. So for sure, I think in
Hmm.
working through that trajectory, being very mindful that the letterists and letterism was something of a unique time and place and has now been transformed into something that is a foundation now for a new way of thinking, a new way to approach language, and one that, again, I was going through I don't know if you've ever seen this book, uh, whoops, La Révolution
Yeah,
Surréaliste.
yeah.
These are all I mean, this thing wasn't cheap, it was expensive, but in it is every single article that the Surrealists had written. And I mentioned in the second book, Introduction to 1930, where
Hmm.
Aragon talks about the words that possess a incantatory strength. Now, Isu takes it further, right? Blasts it apart and says, not even
Yeah,
that. Words, sounds can have an incantatory power, and that's essentially where he
exactly.
he he begins to rebuild. And that idea goes all the way back to another book here. This is Ernst Cassirer, Language and Myth,
Oh,
and Cassirer
fantastic.
argued. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's a wonderful, wonderful short chapter in here called Word Magic. Now, I think we can still use some of the ideas
Mm.
here where words have that, again, that mythical power, that incantatory power.
Yeah.
But instead of the word, again, we've atomized this thing down to just the phoneme, right? The actual
Mm.
sound itself before it's even combined into something else. So what I like is when we expand it beyond just an aesthetic, negation,
Yes,
aesthetic revolution,
yes,
we
yes.
find that it has a clear history of foundational thinking, and then we move it to Isou. Isou detonates language for these very clear reasons that I'm rejecting. I'm rejecting all the technology and theory that brought us to this place of a bloodbath. And I think it was Hegel that said that history is just a slaughter bench. Boy,
Of
following World
course.
War II, absolutely. And so if that's the case, if we're going to start again, right, why not start from the beginning? It
Yeah.
isn't just communication, which is always that urge, but to literally atomize it down to the sound, right? Individual sounds. And if we
Mm.
read Cassar says the language starts as action verbs, right? Action sounds to point things out, to
Mm.
make someone fear something. And I'm not saying that Isu was influenced by Cassar, but those ideas were around at the same time. That's what's really remarkable, is these sort of parallel thinkers
Exactly.
that don't know of each other, but are essentially saying the same sort of thing, or at least exploring the same sorts of ideas. But the fact that the surrealists were willing to use individual words or phrases for shock value, uh, the letterists go further, right? The shock is that it
Hmm.
literally
Hmm.
is disintegrated. But with that, we have to approach it anew. And it's that shock of the new. We need to restart. And of course, to build up from there. And for us today, it says internet connections unstable. Hopefully we're good. For
It's
us
okay. Yeah.
to reconsider letterism in this new context as again a foundational piece, right? That allows us to think through some
Mm.
of these new ideas that poets from the 21st century are considering, maybe to just remind them, hey, there are other people that were doing something similar at half a century ago, and it's worth going back to revisit not only the what but the why, right? The why this was being done. And I think when we're looking at
Yes.
posthumanism, I get the sense that because I'm not an expert on transhumanism, posthumanism, and those, the sense I get is they're almost in awe of the technology, like you've said, and
Mm.
they lose sight of the fact that we are communicative beings, right? Yes, we're
Mm.
symbolic beings because we need language to communicate, but we are communicative creatures. And no matter what we do to reinvent, we can't lose that tool, right? That precious tool to
Yeah.
communicate. And what I
Yeah.
think Isu does is probably take it as far as you possibly can. There literally is nowhere else to go. So if that is the end point of the goal and the role of letterism, and from there to restart and rebuild brick by brick, um, yeah, it is in your estimation, and correctly so, it is the last avant-garde, because
Yeah.
with the SI we get something that is new in a variety of ways, but there was always that anti-aesthetic stance
Mm.
toward art, even though Debord was a filmmaker and there were artists involved in the early incarnation of it. I mean, by 1962, they were gone, right? All
Mm.
of those
Mm.
those folks were gone, and he became increasingly political. So political avant-garde, perhaps, but in terms of that comprehensive restarting. The SI didn't try to restart anything, right? They continued on from where things were, and again, even by criticism, they still built on what Dada had done, what the Surrealists had done, what the Letterists had done, and of course what Marx had done as well. So there were still responses, negative or not, but responses to what had occurred before. But with Isu, I think it is such a radical gesture, right, to
Yeah.
explode
Yeah.
language, that everything that was come prior to it is no longer applicable, right? It's not saying
Yeah.
feasible, but no longer applicable. And suddenly we now have to look elsewhere to understand what's being done. And certainly negation is one of those clear sort of forces that are being applied to language, negating language, but still not the desire to communicate. It's an even more passionate desire to communicate, to communicate something new, because as you pointed out, this is shortly after the release of the atomic bomb, and
Mm.
Just this week, the Nobel Peace Prize, a group that we completely forgot about, those that were fighting to make sure that we have a nuclear-free world. Oh, surprise, they're still around. Who would have thought?
Mm.
And yet they won the Peace Prize just this past week in Oslo. So again,
Mm.
I think the impact of these things is so profound, whether it's an atomic bomb or Second World War, to be mindful of that, how it really runs the gamut of everyday life, aesthetics, art, the creation of art, communications, all those things cannot help but be influenced by these cataclysmic events. And so, if we keep that in mind as we sort of bring the letterists' ideas into the 21st century to make sense of what's going on, I think keeping in mind, how profound that that gesture was. I think absolutely because of I'm not going to say the popularity of the SI, because I mean they're known to you and I, but the SI generally speaking is still a marginal entity, we'll say. But the the influence that the SI had on that group of people is so powerful that we ended up losing sight of what had come before. And there's nothing wrong with going back and saying, okay, how did the SI come into being? Which is something that I ended up doing for a short period of time. But I think it's worth considering it even further, given again the situation that we're in now, which is, no pun intended, the creation of these artificial models, these large language models that will end up, if we're not careful, speaking on our behalf, right? We already have people
Mm.
speaking on our behalf, politicians. Now we're going to have an entire system that literally does the thinking for us. That's the part that's really terrifying. I mean, eventually, if we let it, continue to grow and not challenge it, we won't, in a couple of years, we won't even know how to write a letter, right? I mean, not just a letter, but a letter to someone, an email. Um, that's a terrifying prospect. This is something that
Yeah.
we need to be mindful of. That it's something that is not behind us. It's something that's facing us on the horizon. The letterists were responding to something in the past. We're responding to something in the future that's well on its way. So it does change the trajectory and the perimeters, but I think it's still something that is worth considering because of the fact that we have this cultural revolution that is, to be honest, moving so quickly. I mean, it will be
Mm.
it's basically upon us right now, but we're at a point where we don't even understand to what degree this entity, this AI software is going to invade our lives. So to learn how to manipulate it, to challenge it, to undermine it, to explode it from the inside, right? To make ideas dangerous again, to quote Debord. I think that's something that really would be perhaps where this project should head towards, just to remind people what's at stake. Because again, if we're communicative
Yeah.
creatures, right, that use a symbolic, set of terms, uh, we need to know that we still can use them, understand them, and agree to what they mean. I mean, we're like in North America, we're facing that already. The global shift to the right, which has been occurring over the last 3 or 4 years, that shift to the
Hmm.
right now will shut down alternative ways of thinking. We'll end up streamlining everything. It's this way and no other way. And the U.S. with the election less than a month away. I mean, these are serious issues,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's moving away from letterism per se, but the larger context, right? That larger context for us to be unable to communicate because now suddenly these machines are doing it for us. Well, whoever's programming the machine gets to talk, right? And we don't. So for us to be able to turn around and
Yeah.
speak,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah. So as I was going through my
Yeah.
different books, and of course, ultimately, my favorite here, La Révolution du langage poétique, the
Ah,
Christeva
Kristeva.
book. Now, this is the French one, which is like 600 something pages. The English version is the first third of the book, which I'm not sure why. And yet the
Yeah.
the beauty of this book, I think it still holds up, and there are some really interesting ideas. I think the last
Yeah.
100 or so pages are basically this kind of revolutionary thinking about language in a social context, and never
Mm.
never got
Hmm.
translated. And yet, for the kind of
Yeah.
work that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
and I are doing, that's very, very important.
It's fantastic that I am I'm matching 100%. And what I wanted to add, and it's it's a mix of thoughts about the uniqueness of Isou, is that for me, for example, Isou was trying to present the possibility that the human existence could be transformed in a kind of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And but this special, maybe sounding post-human, but is not. This special approach of Isou is very different from this engagement, maybe imprisonment of the board around the situation. Because for me, the whole concept of situation is very topological and, of course, dynamic and chronological at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But from this point of view, maybe that's why the board encircled himself around the kind of politics. Isou has a liberation because his constant spiritual and philosophical effort to go beyond the letter and start again the narrative of communication from the core of the existential capacity of the human being, I think that maintains always an open possibility, much more dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
much more, metapolitical and anthropological. And this is, for me, the main center of attention around Isou is much more anthropological and not political in comparison with the whole situationism, fantastic, of course, critique and philosophy and this kind of Marxist Gnosticism, but I think at the end of the day, imprisoned in the politics, in the narrative of the politics of 20th century. I mean, and Isou has something always open to this kind of anarchist methodology of Paul Feyerabend. And I think that try to understand better the limits that already the Wittgenstein underlined around the language.
Mm-hmm.
Isou understands the ideography of Ezra Pound and the whole thing about the modernist manifestos, and something that, of course, like the Kristeva or other people that coming from this kind of Platonic rationalism of 20th century, like Frege, the Frege neo-rationalism, which goes through the mathematics to the core of the symbol, but keeping at the same time the importance of the human factor. So that's why Isou is not so easy to put him on the text of posthumanism, because the whole thing that is important for him is this anthropological, I think, revolution of the human being to go beyond the whole communication system, and at the same time transform the whole way of intelligence, but keeping the human being at the center. Isou did not want to make war to the human being.
No,
and
it
this
sounds
is
like
something very important, and it's a crucial difference with the modern posthumanism, because the modern posthuman, even the progressive posthumanism, and love all the time to repeat that it will be great, all the machines and the autonomous intelligence systems to be outside of the human. But it's okay. But maybe, okay, it's something that we can have the scenario that this planetary system will continue to be without a human being. Okay, I don't disagree. But today we are still here with the human subject at the center of the history and at the center of the planetary system, and we have to continue a kind of narrative. And Isou wanted to say that, yes, we want human being to continue the evolution of this modification, and strongly believed that this kind of procedure is not necessarily dependent from the politics. This is I think, something very, very impressive with the whole approach of Isou at exactly at the center of so much political century as it was the 20th century, and in a country full of this, conflict of political ideologies, in a Europe completely distracted and demolished by the whole things of the Second World War. But Isou didn't want to restrict his visionary approach to the Marxism or to any kind of other radical ideologies.
I absolutely agree.
I think this is the most impressive thing, and I would love, to excavate more around this.
Yeah. Well, I think to the elevator pitch of what you just said is, we are still the creators of meaning, right? We are still the creators of meaning, both in our use of language and the understanding of the world. Because eventually, right, artificial machines and all the rest of it, the large language models, the last thing we want is to have another sentient being, another entity to speak on our behalf. And this is something that Debord picked up and, of course, translated into a number of different ideas, which became the spectacle and so on. But ultimately, if we were to ask ourselves, where's the genesis, right? Where's the seed for that idea? And I think you're absolutely right. With Isou, because they had gone through a period of time where technological innovations exceeded human progress. It got to the point where we can build better bombs. We can make bombs that can split the earth in half. Look at us. Human progress suffered as a result of it. So to make sure that he doesn't get caught up in all kinds of isms, Marxism or any other kind of ism, to always never forget that you have us, right? We as human beings at the center of that matrix where we create meaning through language, through discourse, through communications. That's, I think, that humanist moment that is in both Isou's, I think, is, I would imagine, a person, but certainly in his work. And I'm just reading here in Word Magic, just very briefly, the original bond between the linguistic and the mythical religious consciousness, right, is primarily expressed in the fact that all verbal structures appear as also mythical entities endowed with certain mythical powers, that the word, in fact, becomes a sort of primary force in which all being and doing originates. And that's Kasser.
Yeah.
I don't find that, deviating very far at all from what some of Isou's ideas, if you were to try to render them into theories, right? There's something incantatory about breaking language down to its individual syllables, right? It's atoms, it's atomic structure. So it's both a materialist approach to language, but it's also one that is based also in aesthetics, and rejects certainly the aesthetics that led to carnage, and instead to one where we get repositioned at the center of this universe. We become the creators of this meaning. And I think this is both something that Debord had picked up on and sort of managed to cover his tracks really well as he moved towards the spectacle, and saying that détournement and other strategies had to be approached as a brand new entities. You couldn't come at it with preconceived ideas. That's Isou, isn't it? That's him saying, we're going to explode language. We're going to start again. And our discussion, our discourse, our communications will create new meanings, or at least, render old meanings which had been forgotten, displaced, marginalized, silenced. So to be able to have a conversation between two people that is using a sort of new form, new words, new languages, new ultimately it's always still about communication. And whatever it is that is being negated, it's that which caused, the grief and carnage that led up to the response in the first place. Yeah, I think there's a lot in these two that is really worth digging down. And I think uh, because there's so little in English, the idea will be to at least now, how good is your French? Can you read French fairly easily?
No, I don't have any
Okay,
any knowledge of friends. I have very good friends that could be helpful
okay,
and for friend sources, but I think that we can manage because if we can have the the approach to buy the books, or if you have already some books and we you can scan for me and send me the PDFs in French, I think that I will find a way to to
okay.
approach also the French sources.
Because I know I was able to go through the bibliography of the primary sources, and I found, I think, all but one as PDF. So I'll make sure to send them to you. Now, one I wouldn't recommend buying because it's going on, on Amazon for about $450. So very sought after, right? Very difficult to find. But I think with this kind of work, it's always best to go back to where it starts. I mean, it is a kind of archaeology, a philosophical archaeology, to go back to the
Yeah,
source material and look at it
yeah.
and ask yourself, what was going on at the time? What was being said, what was being discussed that even that person may not have been aware of. And then again, Cassier, early uh, uh, Jacques Lacan was working in the early 50s, probably not as well known as he
Mm,
became in the 60s, but even there, right, his psychoanalytic ideas that were drawing from Freud, displacement, negation, all the kind of verbal language games that neurotics can do really well in trying to avoid speaking or
mm.
telling the truth. Of course, Freud's picking up on all of these, expanded and really made interesting by Lacan, and yet they were working at the same time, and in this case, in the same country, and yet there seemed to be no connective tissue right between them until we come along, right, and
Mm.
then we go back and look and go, actually, these individuals may have called it something different, but essentially, in terms of the process and the product, they're actually very quite similar. So I think doing a deep dive
Mm.
into Isou's original works and taking note of the dates, that really will be probably the best way to get that solid foundation. So there will be secondary sources only when necessary, and as much as possible to try to work through the meaning of the terms and the language he was using, the ideas he's trying to convey, to make sure that they are in fact what he said. Because as I tell my students constantly, the worst thing you could do is quote from another book a passage that you think this person's gotten correct, and not always. So be mindful, be careful, because there's nothing like going back to the source material. Like, where did this start? And in the case of this
Mm.
project, it
Mhm.
starts with Issou, but the idea is, have their genesis in the symbolist poets, right? The French symbolist poets. It starts there,
Yeah.
but it's Issou, right, that literally detonates it from within, which is an interesting metaphor
Mm.
following the Second World War. But I mean, it would have been in the air. So there is a little bit of that trajectory in my first book on the SI. I do that. I talk a little bit about the Romantic period, then I go to the French symbolists, and then from there to
Mm.
Surrealism, and then finally to the SI. But I do stop at the Letterists as well and make sure to include them because, again, we cannot agree enough. Without Isou, there would have not been Debord. It just wouldn't have happened. And the fact that Debord was at least not only aware,
Yeah.
but in contact with both Issou and Breton, right? He was able to take from both. And he was that kind of person where he liked to sort of, cover his tracks as he moved along. Now, obviously produced original work, but I think it's up for us as the archaeologists, right, to uncover those tracks and go, yes, the
I
SI may
love
have done
this.
this, or it may have,
Yeah,
yeah.
philosophical archaeology. Yeah.
Well, that's my course in January at Western at the university. That's what I'm going to be teaching is philosophical archaeology that
Uh,
starts that starts with Kant and then picked up by Foucault in the 1960s and then developed by Agamben, Giorgio Agamben, the Italian philosopher, and Alain de Libera, another French
I love
medievalist.
Agaban.
Yeah, so they're doing this kind of philosophical
Yeah.
archaeology, and that's what I'm going to be teaching my students, the critical tools to do this. And so
Mm.
it's remarkable that we're essentially doing the same thing. And to be honest, I don't know if I can work in any other way anymore because it is a more, I don't want to say honest, but it's one that really gives the subject or the object you're looking at least full reign to say, okay, when did this start? I mean, the argument I'm making in the book I'm working on right now is materialism, right? Starts in the ancient world, in ancient Greece, and then the radical French Enlightenment, and then we have Marx. What did it look like? How did it change? What were the primary sources? We're kind of doing the same thing here. So if you can find someone that has at least a reading knowledge of French, I'll definitely send you the PDFs that I have already. And
Yes, yes,
this,
yes, yes. Go through. I will manage with the friends if you can send anything in a
okay.
PDF version. Send and we'll find the way. And I can let you know, Edward, that because of my good knowledge of Italian, there
Mhm.
is an important Italian source deposit around Isu and Letterism.
Oh,
And
perfect.
there are many interesting books in Italian that have a serious analysis on Isu and Lettrism because of the influence of Lettrism in the neo-avant-garde Italian
Mhm.
movements through 60s and 70s. And I don't know if if you are aware about, but the neo-avant-garde groups from literature, for example, personalities like Umberto Eco,
Yes. Yep.
started from these groups. And there were groups that synthesize visual artists and writers at the same time.
Hmm.
The majority of these groups were absolutely influenced from the Letterism, and all the abstract and the friendly Letterism philosophy of these groups, were a product of Isidore Isou's influence, and that's why many leaders of these groups in the magazines during the 60s and 70s translated articles from Letterisme International. So
Hmm.
they were, a kind of spring in the Italian production, the Italian cultural production from the middle 50s to the till the beginning of 70s. Many magazines that coming from Avanguardia, as the Italian were actually directly letterist or neo-letterist.
Okay.
I think that also from this side of view, we can have a kind of help and find if we want to have a second level of analysis of
Hmm.
sources. Also, the Italian sources would be very helpful.
Now, and it's ironic that Umberto Eco would be someone deeply influenced by letterism. He studied semiotics. I have a copy of his book, A Theory of Semiotics,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Opera
Yeah. Yes.
Aperta, right? The open work, La Struttura Assente, right? The absent structure. All those books I didn't realize
Super.
were influenced by letterism. So it's going to cause me to go back and reread them, or at
Yeah.
least
Yeah.
go through them again, because I would understand a semiotician
Yes.
really being interested in kind of understanding the mechanism, at least the machinery of letterism and how it does what it does to be able to define it. I'm sure that's something that may have brought Echo towards semiotics, but certainly that's a real, very important component. But I think we also don't want to fine
Yeah.
tune it so that it's exclusively semiotic. It would be a great injustice to Isou's in his work to focus so narrowly on just one part of it. I think
Yes.
the
Yes.
very
Yes.
role that he
Yes.
played was to be a synthesizer of these different notions of both a new
Of
form
course.
of language, a new form of mysticism, the Kabbalistic thinking that you want to include in the work as well. It's the way in which they interpenetrate one
Yeah.
another, right, and create something new as a result of it. I think that's for sure going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be.
Exactly. Uh, yes, and it's not only about the European. If, for example, you want to consider the groups that coming from the United States on the visual arts of 60s, late 50s, 60s, like Rauschenberg, for example, the New York School, all
Mhm.
these people, the new painting schools that were a little bit influenced from Pollock, but at the center of their painting was a neo-letterist, continuation. So
Mhm.
if someone would like, to consider, especially the Rauschenberg paintings, it's an absolutely Isou cut up thing. It's something that maybe also the covers of Isou and many visual works of Isou, it's like to reproduce from the American painters of 50s and
Yeah.
60s. So it also, I mean that in the broad art production of the second part of 20th century, Isou and Letterism is a basic
Yeah.
component, a basic has a basic impact. So it's very wrong and absolutely how can I say a gigantic mistake to say that these kind of artistic movements influenced from situationist. No, even the fluxus movements like that
Mhm.
has to do with this kind of actionism and performance outside of the certain spaces of artistic were not influenced from the situationist, but from Letterism. But
You're
in
right.
any
Yeah.
case,
Yeah.
it's another discussion. So
Yeah.
yes, we have to stay at the center of this innovative and super synthetic contribution of this guy. This is
Mhm.
the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you okay if we wrap up here? It's uh,
Yep. Yes, I
yeah.
think that we can close
Okay.
and
Now,
prepare a follow up and see how we can
okay. Now the my
continue.
schedule right now is incredibly busy, and it's going to get worse in January. Having said that, I'm not sure whether I can actually be part of the writing process, actually be writing chapters or co-writing. But what I am more than willing to do with you is to have these sessions every couple of weeks where we can bounce ideas off each other, and you can either, send me some information or say, "Hey, I'm working on this. Can you tell me where I can find that or help me out?" Because I really would like to be able to help, but I'm just looking at my schedule and it's already crazy. And then I have a brand new course in
Okay.
January.
Great.
But I think that
Great. Great. Great.
yeah, because I'll be honest with you, when I was working on my not one but two books on the SI, I would have loved someone to bounce ideas off of just to clarify. So that's what I would like to do with you to work
Mm.
with you in that capacity. And whether it's something you're not sure about or you want me to, do you know anything about whatever, I can definitely dig up that information and send you
Super.
PDFs or we can have a session like this
Super.
because I
Super.
absolutely want to help. I don't know if I can commit to actually writing because I have my book due in April, which I only have my first chapter done, and it's supposed to be done in five
Yeah,
months.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's thanks for your sincerity, and I think we can manage also to this kind of contribution. It's fantastic for me personally too. I'm planning to start writing from December.
mhm.
So I want to start and plan the whole research staging
Okay,
and procedure about the management of the sources and all these kind of things. So even for me, the writing is not something that goes to start immediately. But
okay.
yes, we can be you can be my ghost advisor, and
There you go. Now,
and
having said that,
we'll make it happen. We'll make
yeah,
it happen.
Because I know once I get past April, things will cool off considerably. So depending on how this plays out
Okay,
time
okay,
wise,
okay, okay.
I could pick up. So I'm not saying no 100%, but I think this would be really helpful for both of us because it allows me to think through some ideas as well. Because I'm also trying to write
Yeah.
it's I guess an essay in a collection of essays on xenopoems. And so that is something that we can, we can
Mm.
work with because again, it's not letterism, it's
Yes,
something
yes.
else, but it is part of that new world in the 21st century that is again challenging these large language models. So as I'm working through things, I might say, "Hey, I found this excellent text. I'm going to send it to you." So I might be working on something slightly different, but as
Super,
I'm looking through, I'll be sending you things. So I will I'll guide you
super,
through all of
super.
this.
Everything around language, it's yes, yes, yes.
Perfect.
I would love to have your guidance, and hopefully, because I am waiting a response from Calamari Press that submitted a book with the help and assistance of Andrew,
Hmm.
which called the Hermes slang, the slang
Okay.
of Hermes, and it's a book of it's a kind of cryptographic glitch lettristic text of over 100 pages, and hopefully we'll have an agreement with Calamari Press. So I would love to share it with you and send it to you. It's a book not for readers, but for people that would love to have the patience to decrypt
Hmm.
this flow of text and intentional mixture that I made from different sources, from philosophy, mysticism, poetry, science, around the kind of a personal visions also, synthesized in this book. So I would love to share it with you.
I would love to have a look at it because if it's anything like Andrew's work, uh, I I'm always up for the challenge because I think there is that deciphering or decipherment, but also we didn't really touch on it very much, but even the visual aspect of that kind of language, that kind of glitch language that's broken up,
Mm.
the visual component, which I think you were referencing with the art, American art of the 50s and 60s and in the neo
Yeah.
avant-garde in Italy. Um, that's one thing with Isou's work that I think Debord was doing metagraphics back in the 50s, which I think may have been an extension
Mm.
of letterism. It was pretty well short-lived, but I like the fact that it was picked up by other people and explored and expanded. So not only the way in which language creates meaning, but visually how it says something, that kind of overtonal montage of the script in front of you and the shape that it takes, right? Because often that can produce new meanings that are over and above the words themselves. Um, this is something that I think Isou seemed to be concerned with and interested in pursuing a little bit further.
Mm.
But I know with Debord taking this anti-aesthetic stance, I think it was almost at their disservice, right? They really shut down that artistic wing pretty quickly by the early 60s. Now,
Yeah,
clearly
yeah,
lots
yeah.
of other things were going on, but that original idea that came out of the Letterist International, right? Debord's first group, it was
Mm.
short-lived in the first version of the SI for any number of reasons. But I thought what was really interesting was the visualization of language, not just the words, but the way they're shaped, the way they're placed on the page, which is a little bit like collage and cut up, but taking it in a slightly different direction. Anyway, we can talk about that, but it was something that I was thinking of when you were
Super.
describing the art movement. Anyway, so we'll pause now.
Mm.
Definitely stay in touch. I'm going to send you the PDFs and I will start reading through them. And if I'm picking things up, especially with what we've discussed today, and you can find someone to translate them, the worst case scenario, use a Google translator or actually DeepL. DeepL translator
No,
is an
no,
excellent one.
we'll have some. Yes, you are right. But we have a few good friends that I think that will be very nice to all these things. Okay, if
Okay.
it's possible, Edward, to from this recording to have something if to exploit also our discussion.
Hmm.
Maybe through notes or even how we can find a way to share it, it will be great.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Now,
Thanks again. Thanks again, and then we'll stay in touch for sure.
yes, for sure, for sure. And we'll do this again. What I'm going to do is once this is turned into a video, I will upload it to YouTube, and then I'll send you the link along with the PDFs of the books. Then that way, again, because we talked for over an hour. So we may have touched on some things that you've now since forgotten, but at least we have a record. That's the important thing. Anyway, so have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we will talk again very soon, maybe as early as a couple weeks from now.
Thanks.
Okay, take care then. Bye-bye.
Yes,